Good evening, I'm Vincent Makori and this is Africa 54. Today is final day of the two-day White House summit on combating violent extremism. And just a short time ago, U.S. President Barack Obama reiterated his stance that the United States is not at war with Islam. But he also affirmed America's commitment to work with its allies to confront terrorist groups.
When necessary, the United States will continue to take action against al-Qaeda affiliates in places like Yemen and Somalia. We will continue to work with partners to help them build up their security forces so that they can prevent ungoverned spaces where terrorists find safe haven, and so they can push back against groups like al-Shabaab and Boko Haram.
Well, on Wednesday, President Obama told the summit audience that he wants to discredit the belief that Americans and Westerners in general are at odds with Muslims. Mr. Obama says this narrative helps extremists radicalize and recruit young Americans and others. We get more from VOA White House correspondent Luis Ramirez.
Until now, the United States has focused on its military fight against Islamic militants. Now, President Obama says it's time to get at the ideological aspect and what causes young people to become vulnerable to radicalization. After being criticized for not mentioning the word Islamic when referring to extremists, he called for confronting the threat squarely and honestly.
We are not at war with Islam.
Americans have been horrified by images of atrocities committed by Islamic State extremists, some of whom have been recruited from America's Muslim immigrant communities in cities like Minneapolis, home to a large Somali population. It is in communities like these that grievances over discrimination, poverty, lack of education, and corruption make it easy for terrorists to exploit young people, often through social media. President Obama brought together religious leaders, police, and others at the White House summit Wednesday to tackle the root causes.
If we're going to address the challenge of their efforts to recruit our young people, if we're going to lift up the voices of tolerance and pluralism within the Muslim community, then we've got to acknowledge that their job is made harder by a broader narrative that does exist in many Muslim communities around the world that suggests the West is at odds with Islam in some fashion.
The aim is to come up with programs that will change this perception on the streets. In the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, pilot programs are already underway with the input of moderate Muslim religious leaders, including some attending the summit.
We believe in the right of all people to live in peace and security. Muslim imams have condemned and continue to denounce anyone who tries to use the religion of Islam to support terrorism.
After discussions like these, the question is whether government programs will succeed in steering vulnerable young people toward those who espouse a moderate view of Islam and help negate the lure of extremists. Luis Ramirez, VOA News, at the White House.
Well, for more perspective, I'm joined by Jennifer Cooke, Director of the Africa Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Jennifer, welcome to Africa 54.
Thanks, Vincent.
Now, we saw the president there saying he wants a broader conversation on the causes for extremism, why young people are lured to extremist organizations. But some people want him to be very specific, as particularly mention extreme Islam.
Yeah, I think he wants to be very careful with his language because he doesn't want to paint Islam with a broad brush. Nor does I think he want to fuel kind of a bigotry against Islam that you do see, and kind of as people don't understand different interpretations of Islam. I think he very much wants to make the point that the interpretations that lead to violent extremism are prevalent only among a very small majority of Muslims. And so he doesn't want, he was very explicit that he doesn't want this to turn into the West versus Islam. Some of the United States' greatest allies will be Muslims in the fight against violent extremism.
Now, one of the things that people have, concerned that they have raised is that many of the young people that have been attracted to some of these extremist groups claim they have been alienated in their communities in the West. They feel out of place. But they will also at the same time say, well, there are other communities that feel the same, but they don't join terrorist organizations.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole body of literature and psychological analysis on who is attracted to these groups. Many are kind of young immigrants who may have a foot in two different cultures but feel a part of neither one of them. And I think his call, President Obama's call here, is that it can't just be the government that is involved here. It has to be community leaders, teachers, parents, religious leaders as well, that kind of identify kind of vulnerability and work to address and kind of confront what leads young children or young men into radical extremism.
Which sometimes is mind-boggling, because some of their parents came here because of the activities of extreme groups in their countries, in some of the extremist groups there. They come to the West because there's more freedom.
Yeah.
And then these younger fellows who are born and brought up here are attracted to those groups that made their parents leave.
I think it's baffling to the parents as well, who have come to escape egregious violence. But again, it goes to this kind of dislocation of young men who feel a part of neither culture.
Okay.
It also goes to the increasing sophistication of the recruitment tactics by many of these groups, online and social media, Twitter, YouTube, and so forth.
Well, our concern is, not only the kids who are from here, but there are kids in those very same countries that are being recruited daily, whether it is Iraq, Somalia, Nigeria. So is it so much about feeling out of place, really?
Well, and the point was made here, when there are deep human rights abuses, when young men feel they have no economic opportunity, they may be vulnerable to this. That doesn't mean that every young man without an economic opportunity turns to it. Yeah. But certainly there's a context there that may, and money is also involved.
Okay. I want to ask you quickly a question about Nigeria, which has been plagued by the terrorist group Boko Haram.
Yeah.
Now, the government, or rather the Electoral Commission, postponed the election for a few more weeks.
Yeah.
Do you see things changing drastically before Election Day?
Well, you do see a real momentum against Boko Haram right now, I would say. Nigerian military seems to be getting its act together, more coordinated, has seized back a number of towns, has repelled a number of attacks on big towns. Chad is getting involved, Cameroon, Niger. There's a much more coordinated confrontation happening there. Yeah. It happens in a moment of deep distress because of the postponement of the elections. But that aside, I think there is a real momentum right now against Boko Haram. Mm-hmm. It doesn't take away from the distrust of the opposition that this is a ploy to extend Jonathan's term in power.
So some suspicion there. Jennifer, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vincent.
All right. Jennifer Cooke is Director of the Africa Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies.